Good morning. Today we're going to be covering John chapter 12, about half of it, and a very, very important part of this whole storyline that John is putting together. And as you remember, not everything that ever happened to Jesus is included in any one of the Gospels, and John is very specific about what he brings out because he's got a story to tell. And we're going to be looking at some very important verses and just the whole moment that this chapter 12 captures. But before we do that, I want to just put a little context in so that we can understand where we came from. Last week we heard ministry in chapter 11, and as you recall, that's the amazing chapter where Lazarus is resurrected from the dead, right out there in the open. They roll away the stone, and Jesus brings him back to life, and he comes out, and we'll see Lazarus here in this story. And I just want to read a couple of verses out of that chapter to get us started here this morning. Verse 45, many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, meaning resurrection of Lazarus, believed in him. So it was very powerful testimony. But, there's always that, some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So you have this disparity between the believers and those who are still skeptical. So they go back and they kind of tattle on Jesus and tell the Pharisees about it. Verse 47, so the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, what are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. And then jumping down to verse 53, so from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Well, there you go. That's a definitive moment right there. They've had enough of all of this. And then it says, Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from there to a region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim, and there he stayed with his disciples. Jesus originally, when he began his ministry, was sort of an embarrassment, wasn't he? I mean, here's this guy who's talking about all these things. I'm the manna from heaven, and I'm the door of the sheep. And, he said God was his father, and all of these things. And he's sort of like, Jesus, this guy, we don't know anything about him. I don't know where he's coming from. Even his brothers, his own family rejected him. But, as time went on, and he did miracle after miracle after miracle, heads began to turn. The withered hand, a man born blind, a man paralyzed from birth. And Lazarus wasn't the only one raised from the dead. There was the widow of Nain's son, which isn't included in this story. That's a real one. And then Jairus' daughter, a leader in the synagogue, his daughter was raised from the dead. Those were done privately, though. Lazarus was very public, out in the open. No secrets there. And so he was an embarrassment, but then he became kind of an obstacle. Well, now he's a threat. And they said, listen, if this goes on, everybody's going to believe in him. That'll be good. And our nation's going to be gone, because if the Romans find out about it, that there's some other king, they're going to destroy us. Well, they ended up destroying them anyway. So Jesus is now a threat, and they have to eliminate the threat. And so they make plans to kill him. And that's where we start with chapter 12. So he goes to this little village called Ephraim, which is in the wilderness, and I looked it up. It's about 20 miles from Jerusalem, remote up in the Judean hills. And so he's basically kind of hiding out there because there's a threat against his life with his disciples. And I love to make these things real in my mind. Can you imagine that? They're sort of like they're in their Airbnb out in the woods somewhere, private, just the disciples and Jesus, with all of this going on, all of this chaos, and they're being drawn together through the trials. It's a beautiful, you just get a picture of the fellowship they must have had there. So he's there in his little place, and then he gets a dinner invitation. So our first point today is a dinner. And the dinner invitation comes from Martha and Mary and Lazarus. And in the other accounts in Matthew and Mark of the same story, it says that they went to the house of Simon the leper. Well, it doesn't say that in John, but it does in Matthew and Mark, and it's the same scenario. Here's an example of where all the Gospels give you the whole picture. So he's in the house of Simon the leper. Well, if Simon really was a leper, he has no business sending out dinner invitations. because lepers were isolated. They were, off. They had to be hidden. They had to say, don't come near me. So Simon must no longer be a leper. There aren't scriptures on this, but I think it's a pretty safe speculation that Simon was a leper that Jesus had healed of his leprosy. And now he's inviting Jesus to his home. So again, you see this congregation, this kind of fellowship between people. So Martha, Mary, and Lazarus are in the house of Simon the leper, who's no longer a leper, and they're having fellowship together around dinner. All of this took place during, not the exact Passover, but leading up to the Passover feast, and that's important as we get into the story. And there's a beautiful verse way back in verse 5 of chapter 11. It says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and Mary, her sister, and Lazarus." I love that verse. Jesus loved them. Why? Because they believed in him. They were his followers, his disciples. And for us, they would be his believers. He loves the ones who believe in him. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, right? He loves the world, but he has a special love for believers. And I looked over that last in a message on identity, that we're elect, we're chosen, we're precious to him because we are his children, we are his sheep. And that's a beautiful verse to show this wonderful relationship of Martha, Mary, Lazarus, and Jesus. Now, in the midst of this dinner, Mary gets up and she has a jar of an ointment, a fragrant ointment. And in that jar, it says it's pure nard. Now, if you're like me, I have to look that up, right? Well, that's from a plant named spikenard, and that's just the nickname for it. Spikenard is an aromatic plant that only grows in the Himalayas. Now, this is all new information for me. And so it's not something that you get in Israel. You got to import it, and that's why it's very, very expensive. Spikenard is in the honeysuckle family. Now you get it? Yeah, I think we've all smelled honeysuckle. You could be outside somewhere and not even see honeysuckle, but you just know it's there somewhere because it's so aromatic, it's so fragrant. So can you imagine what in this little room, what it smelled like when she breaks this open? And it actually says in Mark and Matthew that she actually broke this flask open and poured it on his feet. It says in Mark and Matthew that she also put it on his head. So literally from head to toe, literally, he is being anointed, and he said, "For my burial." I'm sure they didn't quite pick up on that. But what does Mary do? This is so beautiful. She takes this fragrant oil, and she pours it on his feet, because they're not sitting at chairs with their feet under the table. They're reclining, and they're kind of stretched out a little bit. So she goes over there, and what does she do? She takes her hair, and she wipes this ointment off of his feet with her hair. Now, is that something you just pass over? No, stop and think about it for a second. The Bible says that a woman's hair is her glory. That's the special thing about her. That's a distinctive part of a woman. She takes her glory, the most beautiful thing visible about her, and what does she do? She humbles herself, and she wipes his feet with her hair. There's a lesson for us, guys and girls, that we would take those things that are our identity, those wonderful gifts that God has given us, and we would put them at the feet of Jesus also. I think there's a lesson there for all of us. So she does this, and it says here in John that Judas became indignant about this. He was very upset. But the other Gospels say that some of the disciples also were part of that. So maybe Judas was the most vocal of them, but not everybody bought into this whole idea of her doing this. Of course, Mary, the last time you read about her and Jesus, she's again sitting at his feet in the other story. Martha and Martha's busy with the dishes. You remember that one? And then she's at the feet. Well, here she is again at the feet of Jesus. We need to be more like Mary. But Judas won't have it, and he says that this should have been sold and the money given to the poor. And John comments and said, well, he didn't really care about the poor at all. All he cared about was the money. And because he was the treasurer of the disciples, and he had the money bag and used to use it for himself. So there's this indignant reaction by some of the disciples. And then Jesus, in all of the accounts, we know they're all the same, because his reply is, leave her alone. The poor you'll have with you always, but you won't always have me. And there's another lesson there. You won't always have whoever you're with. So make it special while you have them. And that's certainly true for Jesus, because there was just a matter of days where they won't have him anymore. And they'll be thinking about that line for sure. So they have a dinner, and then in verse 9 and on, I'll say it's a double feature. Now, what is a double feature? That's when you go to the movie theater and you get to see two movies back to back for the same price. Or maybe a sporting event, they got a football game and there's another one right after, and they'll call it a double feature. Well, why is this a double feature? Well, because all these people that says that were at the Passover or coming for the soon-to-be Passover got word that Jesus was there with Lazarus, and they went to Bethany, which is just about 1.5 miles away, and to see who? To see Jesus. Of course, everybody wants to see Jesus, but it says in John they also came to see Lazarus. Like, why not, right? You're this guy that was raised from the dead. I mean, some people actually saw it happen, but other people were told about it, so they come to see Lazarus. So he's like a celebrity now, kind of like a rock star. And they, what would they do? Wouldn't they ask him questions? Again, make this real to yourself. Wouldn't they say, hey, Lazarus, what was it like when, did you know you were dead? And what happened when did you see a light, or did you have an NED, a near-death experience or something? Or what exactly happened? Of course they would talk to him. So they went to see Lazarus and Jesus, a double feature. You get to see them both. And it was very exciting for them. And so they're all there and they're all talking to him. And they would certainly ask him questions. But it says that the Pharisees planned to put him and Jesus to death. The poor Lazarus, he's going to die twice. That doesn't happen very often, you know. But for him it will. And he may very well have been put to death as Jesus would have been. Because they wanted to what? Snuff this out. Get it before it gets out of control. If they go on like this, everybody's going to believe in him. And they knew it. So that's what they want to do. And this brings us to a very important point. The resurrection of Lazarus is a turning point in the ministry of Jesus. Up until this point, you could look at his teachings and benefit from his personal testimony and how he operated and his ethics and all of these things. But at this point now, at the resurrection of Lazarus, all bets are off. The plot is fixed. In the book of John, it's incredible how he brings us to this moment that now everything is going to be different. It is what we'd say a seminal moment, a moment which has altered the direction of events from here on. You know, I think we all have those. If you reflect on your life a little bit, you'll see there were moments where things changed. Could be a tragedy. It could be a great blessing. Could be a job transfer, or a child being born, or the death of a loved one, or something. And you could see, oh, God stepped in and changed course for me. Because life, you know, is kind of mundane sometimes. It's like a hamster on a wheel. You go to work, you come home, you say hello, you have dinner, you watch TV, you play with the kids, you go to sleep, you wake up, it's like that. But every now and then, God kind of steps in. I was thinking of the verse in the Psalms that says, the Lord is in the heavens and he does whatsoever he pleases. Now, some people think that means he legislates every moment of life. I don't personally believe that, but I think it means what it says. When he wants to do something, he does something. When he wants to step into time and into your life to change something for his purposes, he will do it because he does whatsoever he pleases. And here we have it. The resurrection of Lazarus was that kind of a moment where God stepped in and said, okay, from now on, it's going to be different than it was. In chapter 7, Jesus says, my time has not fully come. Chapter 8, it's a comment about him. It says his hour had not yet come. Later on in this chapter, Jesus will say, the hour has come. That's it. All of this has been preparatory. Now it's game time. The hour has come. And certainly there are times in our life like this where we could reflect back and say, yeah, at that time, everything changed. And God did it. And you could give him the praise for it. So there's a dinner, there's this double feature, and now I'll say there's a dedication. So Jesus leaves this place, probably smelling like honeysuckle still. Probably didn't go away. They didn't have hot showers or anything like that. and he makes his way to Jerusalem. Now again, the Passover's coming up. Lots of people are there for these holidays. Thousands of people would go to Jerusalem for whatever feast it was, the Feast of Trumpets or the Feast of Booths or the Passover or the Day of Atonement. All of these feasts, they would come to Jerusalem. So there were thousands of people there. And they knew that Jesus was coming too. So when he comes, what do we see? What kind of scene do we see? All of these people are rejoicing that Jesus is coming, and they got palm branches and they're laying them down. You know, we have what we call Palm Sunday coming up here pretty soon. And that's exactly a celebration of what they did. Before the Passover, they saw him coming. And what do they say? What are they singing? Because they're singing something out of the Psalm. Psalm 118, they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." That's a very important verse. That's prophetic about him. Blessed is he. And just think, all the Psalms are actually songs, so there was some tune to this. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Well, Jesus used that verse another time when he was lamenting over Jerusalem. And he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I wanted to gather you together like a hen gathers her chicks, but you would not." He was heartbroken. He goes, "You won't see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" You see how important that verse is? That's a prophetic verse. And then there's another thing. Jesus is now on a donkey's colt, a young donkey. I've got a couple of those in my backyard. A young donkey. And he's riding on this donkey of all things. Well, what's that? Well, that's Zechariah 9:9. "Behold, your king comes sitting on a donkey's colt." They're fulfilling prophecy. Of what? Of the kingship of Jesus. And I believe this is a legitimate offer of Jesus to be the king of Israel. There it is. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Your king comes sitting on the foal of an ass, a donkey's colt. They're fulfilling prophecy. Now, of course, God knows the end from the beginning. But this is a legitimate offer for accountability. Remember what they said? We will not have this man to rule over us. He could have, if you want a hypothetical. But it was a legitimate offer, a sincere offer, which was rejected, even though some of them were celebrating. So that's really what's happening here, a dedication of him as king, a legitimate offer. And it's very interesting, in the course of that whole situation, it says about the disciples in verse 16, his disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written about him and had been done to him. So they're watching this whole scene, and they're saying, what is going on? Why is he sitting on a donkey? Why are they saying this verse? They didn't understand it. Until when? Until Jesus was glorified. Let's think about that. Glorified. When was he glorified? Well, after his resurrection, he appeared for 40 days on the earth in a glorified state, right? He shows up in a locked room. How did he get there? Doesn't say. He's glorified. That's how he got there. He's doing all these things. He's interacting with the disciples for 40 days. You know, give me some of that. I'd like to have a 40-day Bible study with a glorified Jesus. But let's look at a verse together in Luke 24. And this is a really important verse, it seems, in looking at really what happened after his resurrection. This is Luke 24, and I'm just going to read a couple of verses starting in verse 44. Luke 24:44. Then he said to them, Jesus to his disciples, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms must be fulfilled." Everything written about me. What does that mean? When you're reading your Old Testament, whether you're in Exodus or you're in Zechariah or you're in Psalm 118, you may be reading about Jesus. And it's very important as Bible students to understand that. When you read Psalm 22 and it says, "They pierced my hands and feet," it can only mean one thing. It's a prophetic look at the crucifixion of Christ. When they say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord," Well, who would that be? That would be Jesus returning back to establish his kingdom. And Moses said, another prophet will arise like unto me, and you'll listen to him. That's Jesus. He's everywhere. In where? In Moses, the prophets, the Psalms. So as you're reading the Old Testament, and many times in the Psalms, Psalm 69, he was a song of the drunkards. It's Jesus. Maybe just one verse out of a passage is about him, and the rest is about something else. So you got to be on your game when you're reading the Old Testament. But don't pass these things through. They're very beautiful. Don't pass them by. They are very prophetic and very illustrative of Jesus and what he did. So it says here, then he opened their minds to understand the Scriptures. Wow, that's amazing. So they didn't get it, but now they do get it. And that's what it said here in John, that they didn't understand it at first, but when he was glorified, meaning when he had that time to teach them, then it all made sense. And for us today, through the Spirit and the Holy Spirit opening our minds and teaching, and what we're doing even today, we understand these things. When he sat on the donkey's colt, we know what that meant. That's Zechariah 9:9. Look it up. It's about him. So the Bible is amazing how it is descriptive of Christ from cover to cover. So here's this dedication, receiving him as king. He comes into Jerusalem, and now our last point this morning, starting in verse 21, is a decision. What happens here? It says, now among those who went up to worship at the feast were some Greeks, some Gentiles, some Goyim, as they call them. And when this happens, Jesus has an amazing statement. What is significant about Greeks being at the Passover? Gentiles. Well, it's a Jewish feast, right? So either they were proselytes, they had kind of bought into the Jewish religion, but they weren't native Israelites. They weren't Jewish, so they didn't have Jewish blood. They weren't technically part of the chosen people. They were Greeks. They were there. They were benefiting, maybe, and you see examples, maybe Cornelius was a godly man, and there's other ones like that. Greeks, non-Jews, who believed in the God of the Bible. And so these Greeks come up, and what do they say? We want to see Jesus. That's what we're here for. Passover, we're here for the Passover, but I heard Jesus is here, and I heard about him. I want to see him. And when Jesus hears about that, oh yeah, now it's time. And what this says is the influence of Christ's ministry now goes beyond the Jews, beyond Israel, which is the whole point. And there are many verses, just two represented verses. In Luke 2, Simeon is holding Jesus as a baby, a little baby. And he says that he will be a light of revelation to the Gentiles, speaking prophetically. And then another verse, a great one in Isaiah 49:6. It says, it's not enough that I'll give you to the Jews. He says, I will also give thee for a light to the Gentiles. So there in the Old Testament now, you have that the ministry of Jesus is beyond Israel. It's worldwide. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And so now in the context of a Jewish feast, Passover, their deliverance from Egypt, Greeks show up and they want to see Jesus. And what does Jesus say? Now the time has come. That's it. Now we're ready. Everybody knows about me now, the Jews and the Gentiles. And so Jesus says the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Wow. Notice he doesn't say the hour has come for the Son of Man to be crucified. And I don't want to diminish the crucifixion because it's all part of the salvation narrative, right? But he's looking beyond that. He's looking to a state of glory for him. He's looking beyond his death, beyond the resurrection, to this eternal state of glorification. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. What is the joy? The joy of being glorified and reunited with his Father forever. That has to be what it is. There's no joy in crucifixion. It's terrible. But there is joy in looking past it, looking beyond it, to this eternal state of glory. And that's what he's looking for. Looking beyond his death. The fact that Jesus had to suffer was a stumbling block to the Jews. They did not understand it, but it's prophetic. It's all across the scriptures. They pierced my hands and feet. I mentioned that. That's an example. Isaiah 53 is another one, of course. That his suffering is essential, and he said that to his disciples. It must needs that Christ has to suffer. He has to. So God, even though there was a legitimate offer of the kingdom, it was there for accountability's purposes. But Jesus was always going to have to suffer, because that's how salvation would be secured, by him representing us as sinful men and women and going to the cross. But he's looking beyond that to his glorified state. And then he says, later on in that whole passage, and we're just wrapping up here, verse 24, truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Well, obviously he's talking about his death. And do the disciples understand this? Probably not exactly. They don't understand it yet. But he's telling them so that they can reflect back to it. And what's he say? A seed has to go into the earth and die in order to produce anything. That's the simple lesson of the cross. It had to happen. But is that all we're interested in? Is the seed dying in the dirt? If anybody's gardening, if that's your hobby or your livelihood, no, you're looking for it bearing much fruit. That's what it's all about. Now, every year when I germinate seeds, I put them in the dirt, and I don't believe it's ever going to work, right? How is this hard little thing is going to actually do anything? So I put it in the ground, and I come back like the next day. No, see, yeah, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Wait a minute. Something's coming here. And so it grows, and it produces much fruit, this one little seed that dies. And he's obviously making a metaphor of his whole ministry in that one statement. If it dies, it bears much fruit. It's the result that's emphasized here. And it should be in our appreciation of the Lord Jesus. We remember him in his death, as he's asked us to. But do we remember him in his life, his death, and his resurrection, and ultimately his glorification? That's salvation in total. And sometimes we don't ever think about his life. I mean, we might read about it, but we don't think it's part of our salvation, but it really is. And then his death and his resurrection and his glorification is all part of the gospel story. So I pray myself for more wisdom in understanding and appreciating the depth of meaning of the salvation that we enjoy. It's not enough to say, well, Jesus died for me and now I'm going to heaven. That's something, but there's so much more to it. There's so much of a depth of understanding that we can get more and more of as the Holy Spirit gives us insight into it. And then our last passage to look at here this morning, and we'll cover the rest of this chapter next time, Lord willing. He follows up on that line about the seed going into the ground and dying, and then he says in verse 25, whoever loves his life loses it. And whoever hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Well, we have to think about that. Is on the surface, it's telling us that Jesus says, in order to really get it, you have to hate your life. So let's start hating our life so we can be his disciple. Is that really what he means? Well, there's another passage similar to that in Luke 14. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and brothers and sisters and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Full stop. Let's think about that. What does he mean? Well, when we think of hate, we think of it in one way. How does the Bible talk about love and hate? And that's the point. There's a contrast there, isn't there? He's telling you, unless it's a question of proportion. Unless the proportional attraction you have to this life is in the right proportion to how much you have for me, you can't be my disciple. If it's this way, it's not going to work. It has to be, I have to be exalted. He must increase, I must decrease, like John the Baptist said, right? And so that's what he's talking about. He says, unless whoever loves his life loses it. If this is all you have, this life, it's going to end. Your life is going to end. I'm telling you, it is. And if that's all you have, that's all you have, is this life. So in perspective to an eternity with him in a glorified state, and remember, that's your destiny if you're a believer this morning, the glorified state. We shall be like him. Well, that's not going to work, right? Something has to change. A transformation has to take place in me for me to be like him, and it will. He will glorify me. I will be glorified. I will be like him. I'll see him as he is. These are amazing thoughts, but this is the reality of your future, and we have to lock into that and love that and look for it. So he is not telling us to hate our father and our mother and our wife and our brothers and sisters. Although you might hate your brother, but you shouldn't, all right? But that's not what he's talking about. He's saying your love for that ought to be nothing compared to your love for me, okay? Because God is love. You see it again in Romans 9:13. As it is written, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. Did he hate Esau? No, he loves Esau. Why does he love Jacob? Because Jacob loved the blessing more than Esau did. So again, in proportion, he loves Jacob because Jacob loved the blessing, right? He sought it. Esau despised it, didn't want it, didn't care about it, didn't think it was very valuable. And so proportionally, there's a difference there. Just like he loved Martha and Mary and Lazarus in a way, a very special and deep way. Did he hate Israel? Oh, I hate Esau. No, he loves Esau. He would love for Esau to love the blessing. He loved Cain. He said, hey, why is your countenance fallen? Listen, we can fix this. You can fix this if you do what you're supposed to do. So there's always this yearning for his creation. And there's a lot that could be said there, but I believe that's what Jesus is talking about. When it uses love and hate together, we have to change the way we think about it. Because we think of hate as a final, I hate you, and that's the end of it. But that's not it. It's proportion. So I hope I've made that point. So perspective on our lives here is what Jesus is teaching his disciples. Listen, I'm going to die soon. I've been anointed for burial. The Passover is coming. That's where the death angel he passes over the death angel because of the blood that's on the doorpost. What a picture this is coming up. And we're going to see more of that in these later verses in chapter 12. But remember, the resurrection of Lazarus is the hinge of everything. From now on, Jesus is going to the cross. He will be crucified. He will raise from the dead. And he will come back. And that's what's going to happen. It's time to do what I came on the earth to do. All of this before is preparatory. It's all setting us up for this moment. Now we know who he is. We know his authority. We know his power over the created world. And he's going to lay it all down for us and raise it all up again. And it's all pictured in Lazarus' resurrection. And so when they saw that and they see him, they say, okay, I get it. I saw it there. Here it is again. So this is what's going to happen. And next week we'll look into these very, very important verses starting down in 27, and we'll take most of the chapter in that next message. But remember, he says at this point, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And that's where we are.